Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for a session on student-generated content as a meaningful form of engagement. Today we have two presenters. We have Rebecca Olson, an associate professor in the School of Writing, Literature, and Film. And we also have Dawn Sherwood. She is the director of the OSU Horse Center, and she's also an instructor in equine science. We're gonna have two short presentations, and then we're gonna have a short Q&A session. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Rebecca.
Hi, good afternoon. How's that for sound? I don't want to hunch. If I stand up straight, can you still hear me? Okay. Last year, I oversaw the creation of the Open Oregon State textbook edition of Romeo and Juliet. What makes our Romeo and Juliet really cool, both as an OER and as an edition of a Shakespeare play, is that it was student produced. In fact, it's the only edition of a Shakespeare play that I know of that was produced by students for students. We have a website that explains our process. This was put together by one of the student editors. And we're also on Twitter. I won't show that, but here's a FAQ page on our website. So I've been going around giving presentations to Shakespeareans and to professional editors about what this edition could teach us about best practices. But today I want to make three main points that relate to teaching and to student engagement in particular. And that is that, first of all, the generation of open educational resource content can be a high-order, measurable learning outcome. Second, that OER creation creates public-facing, experiential learning opportunities in classes that may not seem to lend themselves to such endeavors, like mine. And student-generated content can become the foundation for future assignments and activities. So, measurable learning outcomes. My guess is that most of you had to read Romeo and Juliet around the 9th grade. Depending on when that was, you may not know that helping students to read Shakespeare's language has become a thriving industry. The assumption is that you need help by way of supplements, so SparkNotes, online videos, comic strips, even text-speak versions. That's the YOLO Juliet, is the whole play in text. In order to figure out what is happening in the play, like literal translations for students. What my students have helped me to see is that sometimes it is modern editorial convention and not Elizabethan language that makes Shakespeare so hard to read. And that makes sense because for many young people, Shakespeare is the first thing they read that has editorial conventions like footnotes and glosses. So this is a popular high school textbook version. It's the Signet. You know, if you've never seen a footnote before, how do you figure that out? Okay. My students wanted to see if they could render supplemental materials less necessary by taking a unique editorial approach. So ours really offers something different from any of the others on the market. Whereas other versions were edited by scholars like myself, the Open Oregon State Romeo and Juliet was determined by people who actually remember what it's like to read Shakespeare for the first time and who actually were teenagers in the 21st century. So here's how we did it. First, I taught a class on editing Shakespeare in which we studied early modern print history, Romeo and Juliet's critical and performance histories, and some editing theory. Students also interviewed teachers and teenagers about their perceptions of Shakespeare and learned about Oregon Common Core objectives. Working with digital images of early printings of the play, now available via digital humanities projects, student editors produce their own edited scenes. And I'll just say quickly that this kind of project really wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago because before these early editions were digitized, you had to have access to a rare books library, and even then they might not have let you look at the Shakespeare books. Okay. So my students produced their own edited scene. The following term, I oversaw about 25 interns who evaluated the previous term's work, decided what they liked best, and produced a new conflated version of Shakespeare's tragedy, complete with footnotes, scene summaries, and an introduction. I selected a lead editor for each act, and we also formed subcommittees for areas like outreach and formatting. As a group, we spent a lot of time debating things like the use of colons or whether or not to modernize the word thou. That was that we almost came to blows about thou. I'm currently taking the eCampus development course, and I appreciated learning about the revised version of Bloom's taxonomy that identifies creation as high-order thinking. The revised taxonomy puts creation at the top because in order to create, you employ the other competencies. That's absolutely what happened when my students created their own edition. They had to put into practice a range of skills and draw on extensive knowledge, not only about Shakespeare, but also about the larger community that might use their OER. Although essays are the standard way of measuring student learning in English classes, I found that edited scenes and presentations about those scenes actually showed a much deeper level of engagement than I typically see in essays. By the end of the project, my students knew the play much better than I do. You rattle off a quote, they can tell me what scene it is. They truly became experts of the material and had incredibly perceptive insights to share. 2 of my students, for example, presented at last year's undergraduate humanities research conference on campus, where they explained how their editing decisions help us appreciate aspects of Juliet's relationship with her mother that are ignored by most modern editors of the text and thus by most teachers and scholars. Okay, second, OER creation creates public-facing, experiential learning opportunities in classes that might not seem to lend themselves to such endeavors. So the creation of our open textbook was from the start imagined as a kind of service project. We wanted everyone to have access to a high-quality edition of Romeo and Juliet. And believe it or not, ours is currently the only version I know of online that, with footnotes that were written in the last 100 years, that is free. Everyone else who has put their versions with footnotes and helpful glosses online is charging for that content. We wanted high school teachers, for example, to just be able to download or link to an edition that supported their needs and those of their students. And so this is why we have the online version, which is really cool. There's a hover function over difficult words, but we also included a PDF because we wanted people to be, schools that didn't have tablets or computers, to just be able to print it out for their students. So I'd like to show you a couple of examples of how my students' edition responds to their intended audience, which was new readers of Shakespeare both in high school and in college. First of all, the student editors wrote an introduction tailored specifically to teenagers, one that spent less time talking about historical context and more time addressing issues like contemporary teen suicide. Remarkably, I think our edition may be the only one on the market that includes the number for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. That was 100% the students' idea. My students also had audience in mind when they made their aesthetic decisions. They wanted young readers to know at a glance that the edition was for them. This is most obvious in their commitment to white space. So on the left is the edition that the Pelican that we use here on campus in our back core Shakespeare classes. It has very little white space, and then my student's version is on the right. My students felt that even when marginal glosses and footnotes are helpful, and the Pelicans are, they inevitably scream, "You need help," and thus make a text seem intimidating. White space, on the other hand, creates a more welcoming experience and suggests a simpler text. Now, my students' decision to minimize footnotes and glosses put extra pressure on their editing decisions. It actually was much harder to do what they did. But they felt it was worth it to have that visual breathing room and a quicker reading experience. Young people, they felt, needed to establish their own relationship with the play without being interrupted constantly by notes, especially if they would be going over passages in detail in class. One thing that surprised me was my students' use of punctuation, and in particular, their relatively judicious use of exclamation points, because when they email me, it's all exclamation points all the time. When editing, they typically reserved their exclamation point for true exclamations, such as oaths or salutations, for joking around, and for anger, and they tended not to use it to indicate distress. Here's the thing, for my students, most of whom are in their early 20s, the exclamation point does heavy lifting conveying tone and intent in social media messages and texts. Whereas an exclamation point from Juliet might help someone of my age read despair into a line, They argued that it could be read as melodramatic or even cheerful to a high schooler. And here, if you know the play, you might think of, "Oh, happy dagger." She's not actually happy. A good example is Romeo's final speech, the one in which he says, "Thus with a kiss I die." The speech was printed without any exclamation points in the first quarter of 1597. I think that's the one on the left, and with only one in the first folio of 1623. Yet in the Folgers textbook edition, we get 6 exclamation points, and in the Pelican and Signet textbook editions, 12. MIT's online version, based on the Arden but lacking notes, has 14. Our version, by contrast, has 4 exclamation points. The only one I've seen with fewer is the Norton, and they actually have a stage direction in place of one of ours. My students felt that a text peppered with exclamation points would immediately convey a kind of histrionics that reinforced stereotypes about the play that have less to do with the script and more to do with its cultural status. Most of all, they felt that the young lovers Romeo and Juliet should be taken seriously, not least because their young readers would want to be taken seriously. A light hand with exclamation points during moments of crisis suggested trust in those readers to inflect the lines with the emotion they deemed appropriate. So I know from my research on first-generation college students that hands-on and community-targeted assignments help engage and retain students, and underrepresented students in particular. Yet for some of us, our fields don't seem to immediately lend themselves to experiential projects or service learning. The creation of our edition enabled my students to use literary analysis in ways that served their community, and I think there's a lot of potential for OER content generation to open up opportunities for experiential learning in a wide variety of courses. I want to say, too, that my students were really thrilled to be able to make something. They talked a lot about future job interviews and what they would say about our project. They have a link to put on their resumes. And they seemed especially excited that it had to do with their major, that it had to do with the cognitive skills they were developing as an English major, and it wasn't just some other project in a different kind of class. So finally, student-generated content can become the foundation for future assignments and activities. There we are at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I used my development funds to take them. For many of them, it was the first time they saw a professional play, so it was really fun and also helped our edition a lot for them to see it in action. Well, it was Othello, but they got to see a play. While the creation of the Open Oregon State Romeo and Juliet was a valuable learning experience for the student editors who made it, their product continues to enhance the learning experience of other students as well. I have used the edition in other classes, which saves students money, of course, but has also, they report, made the text a more pleasurable and less confusing read. In my upcoming eCampus Shakespeare course, students will edit just a few lines on their own and then compare their passage to the Open Oregon State version to consider what the differences suggest about target audiences or how they influence the reader's interpretation of the play. I think the fact that my future eCampus students will compare their editing to that of other students as opposed to scholars will make the assignment a more interesting and inspiring one. And I hope that the assignment also helps them think of themselves as part of a cohort of OSU students past and present, something that I think might be especially beneficial for distance learners. This assignment takes for granted that their perspectives on the text will be different from those of my previous on-campus students, and that it is a valuable perspective worthy of analysis. And depending on how this all goes, I have kind of big plans for the project. Our Romeo and Juliet represents the decisions of a specific demographic for a specific demographic. My students would be the first to tell you that their edition reflects the fact that most of them are white, able-bodied, between 20 and 25 years old, and already enthusiastic about Shakespeare. People have encouraged me to do another play with students, and I'd like to, but ideally the team would reflect a more diverse set of assumptions and previous experiences with Shakespeare. I thought about partnering with another school, one that's not a West Coast research university, for example, but I actually think this is where I might take advantage of eCampus and the fact that it attracts students in very different places in multiple senses. And to that end, editing, as we did on our OER, is perfectly suited to asynchronous collaboration. We even had a couple editors whose work schedules prevented them from meeting on campus, and it wasn't a problem. Remote collaboration was always part of what we did. I kind of like the idea of an OER that is created by eCampus students over multiple terms. This would be more cost effective than what we did and easier for me to manage, and would also involve a greater number of students. In short, I'm really excited by the potential for the creation of OERs to engage all of our students. References.
It's been a while. Okay, so I'm gonna have to drop the mic here because I'm about a foot shorter than she is. All right, we're going to completely change into a whole new different realm, and that's horses. I manage the OSU Horse Center. I teach all of the horse classes except for one on campus, and the ANS 335 Equine Health and Disease class is one of the only ones, or is the only one that we have online at this time. It's a junior and senior course. It's open to any student. It originated on campus, and I still do teach it on campus every spring. And this summer will be the third time I've taught it. What's really interesting is I have students from a multitude of states. I had a student this last summer that was in the military and actually stationed in Turkey while she was taking the class. And so really wide variety of students, but there are some focuses. So within the equine and health disease class, you can kind of see here, yes, that is me. This is my introductory video as to who I am. That's the horse that I had that I used all the time for my demonstrations. And so one of the biggest things within the equine industry is biosecurity. With biosecurity, there are a lot of horses that are transported internationally. For example, the Olympics and horse racing. There are a large number of horses that are being transported. So then the question is, okay, what are the biosecurity protocols within that? So there are a lot of countries that are transporting and moving horses internationally that do have a highly recommended protocol as far as what vaccinations to give, okay? However, there are some countries out there who can't afford these vaccinations, nor they don't have the protocol, or maybe the other thing is there are no vaccinations for that particular disease. So the question is, what would happen to horses in North America if a disease was transported in from another continent that our horses have absolutely no immunity to? Just to give you an idea, this actually did happen with West Nile virus. In 1999, West Nile virus was brought into the Bronx Zoo. It was found within flamingos to start with. It's transmitted via mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are going to go anywhere they want to go, okay? In 1999, there were 25 horses in the state of New York, which were, or in the state, yeah, let's see, Bronx Zoo. There were about 25 horses that were infected in 1999. Just to give you an idea, in 2000, there were 60 horses. 23 of those were euthanized, okay? We're going to jump ahead a couple years. So 1999, 25 horses. 2002, 15,257 horses. Okay? It literally just exploded. And it was namely because we did not have West Nile virus in the United States. Our horses were not vaccinated for it. They did not have an immune system for it. Okay? And so that gave rise, with the biosecurity, that gave rise to what we call the Continental Disease Project. So within the Continental Disease Project, it actually started out as a brochure. And in my class on campus, we still do a brochure. And within this class, we have 6 of the 7 continents because we don't have horses in Antarctica. So we just take that out of the mix. And so essentially within the class, whether it's online or on campus, the students cannot duplicate diseases. So if there are 24 students, there are 24 diseases that are covered. And we split that between the 6 continents. And so this just kind of gives you an idea. This is the front of one of the brochures that was designed in my on-campus class last year. But talking to eCampus designers, we kind of came up with the idea of, would a website be beneficial? And so there was a website which we developed, and we're kind of talk about where that's headed now. But essentially, if you go in and you go Google piroplasmosis, we all know maybe 50% of it's correct, maybe 50% of it is incorrect as far as the information, okay? And so that was one of the things with the design of this website that I, myself, in conjunction with vets in the area, we can keep the information correct, okay? And we would be a reliable source. Within the website and also in the brochures, there's certain things that they need to cover, such as, is it a virus, a fungus, a bacteria? How is it transmitted? What's the prognosis? Is there prevention? Things along those lines, and this is just kind of a little bit of that first brochure that you saw. So within the design of this website, essentially what it is, let's just say there's 4 students per continent, per those 6 continents. And so if you look at this, what they do is they can go in, you can see Asia has not been claimed yet, and so Asia could be claimed by 4 different students. And within this, they actually sign up for their disease at about week 2, okay? And this is a class during the summer that's taught for the full session. It's a 10-week session. So about week 2, they actually go in on a Google spreadsheet and they sign up for their disease, okay? So then they can see what everybody else has signed up for. That way we don't get any duplication. So then what they do is they're going to go in and with the development of this website, they're going to go in. So there's 4 people who can click on Asia to claim it, all right? So you can see right now, I highlighted it, Asia popped up. If I want to claim it, I click it, and now I've claimed Asia, okay? And so from here, what they can do is they can go in on that click here to enter content. They can go in, and that's where they give and put out however they want to do it. They can give all of the information of that particular disease that they're looking at doing, okay? So some of the things that I have run into with this is trial by error. And those are a few of the things that I worked on last year, we're working on, or I'm going to be working on them this spring before this class goes active again this summer, is one of the things that I ran into last year is students were having trouble. Maybe a continent was not available to them, or they decided to change continents and they weren't quite sure how to take their name off of Asia and put it on Africa or something along those lines. And so the other thing that we ran into was the difficulty in creativity. What I have seen with the students is they get really creative, and that's one of the things they're graded on is creativity, and providing the information in an easy to read, understandable format rather than just throwing paragraphs on it. So they have to really think about what information are we going to put on here, how are we going to organize it so it's easy to follow for somebody who has no idea about piroplasmosis, okay? So some of the students were unable to be as creative as what they wanted, and they're given information regarding like copyrights on pictures and things along those lines. But they were running into trouble being creative, getting the information on, getting pictures on, and so that was one of the biggest feedbacks that I got on this last year. And then also was the difficulty, they would design it, And then we were having issues. There's a link on there that says, if you want this to be sent to Dr. Sherwood, click here and send it to her. There was a disconnect between what the work they had done, and usually I would get a blank page. And so there's some disconnect in there that needs to be worked out before this is taught and put up again. So literally what I did was send me your PDF files or your Word documents, and so they sent that to me, and then I graded them just as brochures. So they still designed the content, they still sent it to me, and so they were not affected grade-wise, but yet we still have a blank website. Okay, so future plans, I am gonna do this again this year, just because I think it is really important for these students to realize if some of these diseases, just like West Nile, came across, our horses were devastated. Numbers, economics, everything. I was actually in Nebraska in school getting my PhD when this happened, and it was pure panic with horse owners. Do we vaccinate? Do we not vaccinate? Do we take the chance? And it was just this chaos because nobody knew about West Nile virus. And so one of the things with this website is, ooh, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna get, you know, the down and dirty about piroplasmosis, and then you can either panic or you can rest easy that night. That's kind of the two ways it can go. So I am gonna run this again this year. For myself, one of the biggest things that I'm gonna do so I can help the students is I'm gonna make multiple dry runs, making mistakes, doing this, doing that, deleting this, changing that. So then if the students contact me going, hey, I can't get this to run, then I can go, have you done this? Did you do that? Have you tried this? Okay? So that's one of the biggest things is myself making those dry runs so I can help those students further. And lastly, let a horse whisper in your ear and breathe on your heart. You will never regret it. That's it. And that is one of our mares and one of the foals she had at the barn. I don't know for sure. This was all done, so the development of this website was actually done through the developers of eCampus. They sent me the link, and then that was how that progressed. So it wasn't through like an actual, I don't think it was through like an actual, yeah. I'd have to talk to the designers on that one. Okay, it was an interactive global map. Yeah. So essentially, what it was is the students were building the content. Once that content was built, I had approved it, I had it vectored by a couple vets, then the plan, or the plan still is, to make that available to everyone. So yeah. Right. So kind of the thought is for a while, we will build on it until we get kind of a large number of diseases within each continent. And so, yeah, it would be built to where probably the following year it would be, oh, sorry, you can't take any of these 24. But the thing is there are so many different diseases out there that, I mean, we could go for years and never repeat a disease. Yeah. Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah. Mine was especially tricky because they were taking it for different numbers of credits. Some students were taking it for 2 credits, some for 4 credits. They each came up with a plan of a work plan of what they were going to accomplish, and then they had to submit a report at the end, and they were sort of assessed in terms of the outcomes they had kind of outlined for themselves. And that made sense for their number of credit hours. That's how I did it that time. Going forward, I don't know yet, but I think sort of contract grading methods work really well for this kind of project, where they tell you at the start what they're going to do to get a certain grade, and then it's whether or not they deliver. You know, it's kind of how I have been approaching it. So the question is about informal feedback about the value for the students. I don't know if you want to start or.
Go ahead.
Well, in the first place, I ended up writing a lot of letters of recommendation for students after this project. I got to know them so well, and so I saw a lot of their personal statements for graduate school or statements for internships, and they all talked about the project, so I know it was meaningful to their educational experience. Oh yeah, I totally lost my train of thought here. I visited a class. We have a class on campus for double degree students in English and education. And so the class is almost all students who are planning to be teachers. And I came in one day to share our project, and some of the students who were involved were in that class, and they just took over the class and came alive. And I think that was the thing that really hit me, that I had done this with a bunch of future teachers. And so the fact that it was meaningful to them as people who are in turn going to be teachers was really cool, and something I hadn't anticipated.
So with the continental disease one, I think a lot of it was the impact as far as it kind of got them enthused about the project, that when it does end up going live to where anybody can look at it, they are providing information to other horse owners and the public that is going to help them, you know, decide one way or another what they're going to do or how they're going to manage their horses. And the students that are in this class are very passionate about horses. And so anytime that they can help another horse owner, that just makes them even more enthused about that. And so I think that was a lot of it, was the fact that this isn't just me who's going to be seeing this, but anybody. And so I think that had a huge impact on it. Quiet group.
We're after lunch. Oh.
I have about 20 in there every year. Yeah.
Hmm. It would be easier next time. The question is about logistics and time management. I mean, I was learning so much as we went. I mean, I spent like 2 weeks just trying to figure out if my students had access to InDesign. I mean, it was just next time it would go more smoothly. But I tracked my hours, and it was like at least an hour a day for 10 months straight or something. Like, because then I also, once the students were done, then I went through the whole edition word for word to make sure, it was all. I wasn't going to get any angry emails from other teachers. So it was a huge investment of my time, which is why I think breaking it up over a multi-year period might be the way to go about it next time.
Mine would probably be, so as far as on the brochures and stuff, I wasn't impacted as much time-wise as what I will be when this does have the chance to go live, because I will literally be checking every single fact and every single bit of information that those students put out there. And so, that'll be a lot of it in the future as far as literally checking and vetting that information. Because I don't want this to be one of those websites that gives false or incorrect information. That's a huge pet peeve of mine. And so I'm not going to be one of those.
She asked about peer review. I do, in that I have colleagues who are going to use the edition at the college and the high school level, and we'll be getting feedback. And during the process, we were getting some assessment. My students were really industrious about contacting their teachers and finding. They found all kinds of OSU students and also high school students to read passages and give us feedback. So we were trying to do assessment all the time, but now I can really start hearing back from people who are using it in a course.
Yeah, and with the disease one, they can all see the brochures, especially the in-class one. Everybody sees all the brochures. But as far as peer reviews, yes, when we go into the website, but then also I'm going to have at least 4 or 5 different veterinarians follow up to also literally go through the nuts and bolts on it.
Students who love Shakespeare, but love, and the same with horses. Students would be so happy. I'm putting online back core class, requirement type of course. Students have selected it, thinking this will be a good way to check off the requirement.
Yeah.
And imagine most of your incentives. Are there any sticks that you have to even think about? Assignments to be put on play for.
That's interesting. I'm trying to think about that. I mean, my Shakespeare class is a backcourt class, so I get a lot of, and I actually went around to classes and encouraged people who don't like Shakespeare to join our team, because I thought it might be problematic if they all already understood Shakespeare. No, I didn't have that. I didn't have issues like that. I think, again, the opportunity to make something was, I had the opposite problem in that students spent way more time on it than really they should have for their credit hours or whatever. So I kind of had the opposite problem more than anything. And they were in charge. I think you don't need as many sticks maybe when they're the ones who are in charge, and I'm there to be in more of a supportive role. But they did have lead editors, so I don't know. The lead editors may have been cracking a whip behind the scenes and I didn't know about it, but I didn't have to do that, no.
Yeah, I didn't have any problems with that either. And if somebody did run up against something, they were always really good about communicating with me. One perfect example, I had a student that was working forest fires. And she got a hold of me and she's like, I am going to be in the middle of nowhere for the next 2 to 3 weeks. What can I do? And so we worked and got things figured out as far as changing due dates for her. She had absolutely no internet, no cell service, anything like that. And so it was just a matter of, it's just a matter of working with some of those students. But those are also students too, that they communicate with you prior to, and it's not, oh shoot, I missed the deadline, so now I'm going to be like, oh, I had no internet service. So it's just communicating. The only good excuse is, sorry, I was sitting on a horse.
Questions for the presenters? All right, well, thank you both very much for joining us today and sharing your insights. We really appreciate your expertise. And thank you all for joining us as well. We hope this has been a valuable experience for you today, and we would welcome any feedback you have. We have a survey in your conference pamphlet on page 3. We would welcome any insights you have, and enjoy the rest of your day.